update the files inside to the new package that I saw from the Windows version. But I would use the Linux executable, but using the same type of scripts, and then repackage everything into a deb file. And that's how it was made.
I'm trying to I want to repackage it for Arch Linux because for some reason I can't get alien package converter to install.
It might have to do with the package name itself.
Well, no, I just couldn't get the alien package converter to install because it's pointing on their repositories to Debian's an older one step back for the current version, and that's not available on their servers anymore. So I was just figuring I'd just repackage it.
You can tweak the dependency. Sometimes it could be just a dependency that's causing it to have issues.
Yeah, it just doesn't like the .dat.
All right, so I'm gonna get started today. I just want to make sure that you guys know what you have to do, and it's due soon. It's Project Proposal 1. So I'm just going to click on it so you can see. 2 people have turned in, which is great. The due date is the 17th, which is 2 days later on Wednesday. It doesn't have to be fancy. Okay, this one you just need to use Omelette, which is the tool that I demonstrated in class, to draw a use case diagram for an application that you think, I think this would be a great app for a class like this. You don't need to know the details. You don't need to know exactly how I'm going to implement all the features. All you have to do is to tell me what it is and how an end user is going to use your application. That's all you need to tell me with this particular homework assignment. Omelette already has the match stick figure and then also the ellipse for the use cases. So all you have to do is to just drag and drop a few things, change the names to reflect who you think is going to use your application, and also how, well, not how, but why the application is useful to the actors. Okay, so those are the things that we have already talked about in this class, and so it's not going to be very time consuming. You just have to sit down and do it. To think about what you want to do, document it, turn it in, and what I will do is I'm going to take a look at your submission, and I'll give you some feedback of, okay, let's take a look at this, take a look at that. I think this might be a little bit too ambitious, given the limitation of the tool itself, or this may be too ambitious because it involves a lot of remote database administration and then local parsing of stuff. So I'll give you some feedback based on that. So are there any questions about your homework assignment, Project Proposal 1? And it's called Project Proposal 1 because after a while I'll give you a Project Proposal 2 to help you refine what you want to do. Okay, because based on what we're teaching in this class, you might want to change it a little bit and say, well, I'm going to make it less ambitious, or I want to make it more ambitious because of I just feel comfortable with more stuff now. All right. Any questions? Anything you guys want to ask about this particular homework assignment?
So the written description of this one should be pretty short.
Yeah. So if you look at the homework description itself, present a project proposal for this class, and it's written only. You don't have to stand out here and talk to the entire class, even though that would be a great idea for a class. One of the things that many employers have told us time over time is that people in the IT industry and also in software development, some of the brightest, smartest people cannot communicate. Okay, you give them a difficult problem to solve, they would just kind of grab the problem, run back to their cubicle and solve the problem and give you the solution. But when it's time to explain, what is involved or ask for any clarifications, they just cannot communicate. Okay, so having a presentation skill is actually very useful. So continuing to read the homework description here. At this point, focus on the user's perspective, or the person who's going to install your app. How is your app useful to an end user. That really is the focus. Yep. I got it. So I'm gonna pass it around. Thank you. Thanks for the reminder. Very good. Because I have to mute my phone, so I cannot rely on my phone to remind me.
Just use the Google Docs. Have Google Docs for it. Come in, access it.
Yeah.
Have to give us the password of the day in order to actually know we're here.
Oh, that's the way to do it. Okay, so are there different classes of users? In other words, besides your regular quote-unquote end user, are there administrators? Are there tutors? Different types of classes. Different types of users. Why should an end user install your app? What is it for? So at this point, I don't need you to explain the logic of stuff. Okay, how to implement it. Just focus on why someone wants to install your app and what can be done. What can the app do? Okay, and document this using Omelette. I have demonstrated to you guys how to use it. There's a link on Moodle to download the application. It's a Java application, so that means it runs in Linux. I've shown you how to use it in class. It will run in Windows as long as you have Java installed. It does not require the latest and greatest Java. It's not Minecraft. Okay, it's not like every time you install something, something else will break. This is a fairly simple application. It's not a huge installation. Draw actors and use cases. Okay, an actor looks like a matchstick figure, and a use case looks like an ellipse. Okay, with a description on the inside, and connect those things to reflect your proposed application. Your use case diagrams should consist of at least one user and at least two use cases. So think of two reasons why someone might want to download your application. Okay, two ways to make use of your application. And also make sure that you do not use use cases that are not really use cases. For instance, authentication is not a use case because no one is going to install an application just to do authentication. Okay, so usually the authentication is a step to do something else, and it is really just a means to make sure that unauthorized people do not have access to the resource. What if your app, the sole purpose of your app is to open the garage door, and authentication obviously is a very important step to it? Well, guess what? People install your app not to do the authentication, but to open the garage door. Okay? So opening the garage door is a use case, authentication is not. And is that okay so far? What is a use case and what is a supporting feature to make it more secure, but cannot be counted as a use case. Actually, that may not be a bad application. Okay, using Wi-Fi, as a remote control for your garage door, that opens up all kinds of possibilities.
All kinds of doors. It opens up all kinds of doors.
Well, it depends on how well you protect your Wi-Fi connection. But I would still assume it is more secure than most garage door openers, built-in circuitry. Even the ones with rotating code. All right. So submit the following. Use the text editor area to type a description of your proposed project. Doesn't have to be long. I don't want to turn this into an English writing project. If you want to, use bullets. Okay, just give me a list of things. You don't have to have complete sentences. The whole concept, the whole idea is not to have you spend the time on the formatting, on the writing part, but to have you to think about it. Think about what you want to do, and then use Omelette to create a use case diagram. Upload the file, the use case diagram, as an attachment to your homework submission. Now, when I say turn in an Omelette file, it is not the PDF. Okay, it has to be the actual Omelette file so that I can use Omelette to open it. The assignment is graded based on your demonstration of your understanding of use cases and your knowledge to use Omelette to create these diagrams. Your score also depends on the content of your proposal, which means if it just has a matchstick figure, a line, and an ellipse, but no descriptions whatsoever, that's obviously not going to get full score. Maybe some partial credit, like yes, you have demonstrated that you know how to use the tool, how to upload the file, but not necessarily what it's for. Are there any questions about this assignment? Because only two people have turned it in, I'm a little bit worried, that maybe, some people do not know, what they're supposed to turn in. Any questions? Okay. And this is not really one of those, this is the only right answer kind of, question. I mean, it's fairly flexible. All right. So from 2 visits of, your fellow classmates, this morning, I think I'm going to start this class with taking a look at some of the sensors, just so that we can explore, what you can do with App Inventor. Okay. If you have any questions related to, I'm not quite so sure, whether this can be done with my proposal, ask away. Okay. Use me as a inexpensive consultant. Yes.
I was just wondering about the text box, how you actually get information. Like if someone enters information into it, how we can actually make use of what's there.
Okay, I can do that. Okay, so I'm gonna do that, and also, show you guys how to make use of the accelerometer, because that was one of the things that was brought up this morning, and I think it's a great question. Okay. Thank you. Okay, I'm just clicking this just to see. Oh, they still don't have anything for Linux.
There it is.
I do.
You should send them your stuff.
I was trying to send them, the stuff that I had. It was just, I just don't know who to send it to. Oh, okay. I think they probably have an email address.
Probably just the general.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they probably has a contact information. In fact, I actually met the director of the App Inventor portion of the MIT Media Lab. She went to a conference in San Francisco on IT stuff, and that conference is mostly for community college professors. And she came and she did a demonstration, and then a whole bunch of us, kind of had lunch with her. So, I gave her some feedback of, the older version of App Inventor and things that can be improved. Not on a piece of napkin, though. All right, so first thing first, I want to go to sensors and just go to accelerometer sensor and also orientation sensor. But in this case, I think accelerometer sensor may make more sense. Okay, so I just drag it into the application itself, so it becomes an invisible component, and then I switch to blocks so I can find out what I can do with it. So now I can click accelerometer here, and this is great because what it's saying is when accelerometer sensor dot shaking, which means it is waking up the application and say, hey, here's an event, somebody's shaking the device. So you don't have to constantly poll or constantly have your application to check, oh, am I experiencing any type of changes of acceleration? You don't have to check anything. You just have to say, wake me up, when someone is shaking it. Okay. Now I'm not really sure whether the sensitivity can be changed, but what you can at least do is to give it a try. Okay. Write this application, upload it to an actual Android device, and check it out. Yep.
I figured out something with the accelerometer. I was playing around with it, and it appears when you shake it when the device is off, it still
it still runs. Yeah. Oh, when it's off?
When it's locked, yeah.
Oh, when it's locked. That's because when it's locked, your application is still on the front end. Now, if you run another application on the top, I think your app is still running, quote unquote, in the background.
Right.
But that's something what you want to do sometimes is to keep your application active.
All right.
Okay. So when when accelerometer sensor 1 is sensing shaking, then you can do whatever logic that is involved here. Increment a counter. Okay. Another step is taken, or something along that line. Or you can also go back to accelerometer sensor 1. And then get one of the other things. Okay, so you can basically look at the, if you don't want to just do the counting, but you want to see what type of changes of acceleration is being experienced, you can always refer to the x, y, or the z acceleration, and these are all in meter per second squared, which is the SI unit for acceleration. You can also refer to, you can change the sensitivity, if your device is measuring it, too sensitively, or with too much sensitivity, you can change the sensitivity to an appropriate amount if you want to detect like jogging or running or walking. So that's good. It's a very easy device to use from this perspective. In the next class, in cisp363, it's not going to be this easy. Okay, this is like making things so much easier to deal with. All right, so are there any questions, general questions about using the accelerometer sensor? Okay, if there are no questions, I'm gonna switch back to the designer view. Last time we were talking about how to pass information from one screen to the next and back. So that's something that we'll continue to talk about because I'm suspecting some of your applications will involve multiple screens. And it makes sense to have a multiple screen application. All right. Are there any other questions that I can answer at this point? No questions? Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and try this out. I'm going to delete the sensor because I'm not going to use it in this particular application. So instead, I'm going to use this as an example to show you guys how to pass information from one screen to the next without using TinyDB. Now, using TinyDB is one way to do it, but I don't like that solution because it is going to overwrite the information in a TinyDB in order to do this. Okay, which may not be what you want to do, and there are other features designed for this particular application. So what I want to do is to pass information to the screen that I'm starting when I click on this button. Okay, the Darth Vader picture here is actually a button. Okay, if I click on it, it's going to switch to the next screen. So I want to pass some information to the next screen. And to combine this with what you just mentioned, how to make use of the content of a text box, let's go ahead and combine both demonstrations into one single program. So to use a text box, you go back to user interface and drag and drop a text box into your application into the screen. And the default name is really generic. It's just text box 1. You can change that by clicking rename. You can turn it into text box message. Okay, you want to send a message to Darth Vader. Okay. And you can also change the properties of your text box. Now remember, most of these can be changed in your program. Most of the properties can be changed by your application using your own logic. But on the other hand, if you want to change the static one, like when your application first load and you don't want to have to spend your time using the blocks to change the configuration, this is a good place to make changes, or at least set the initial settings. Background color, it is enabled. You don't necessarily want to use bold or italic font. The font size can be changed. Typeface can be changed. The hint can be changed. So I'm going to change this one here and say, tell Vader what you think. All right. If you click multi-line, then you can enter multiple line text, which means you can use the enter key on the virtual or otherwise keyboard to separate lines. Okay. By default, it is not multi-line, which means it can only contain one line of text. You can also click numbers only if you're expecting something that is a value and you can only use numbers. In this case, because it is a message, I'm gonna make sure that this feature is off. This is the initial text, okay, which means when the application first starts and this pops up, this is going to be the actual text content in the text box itself. Most of the time, you want to leave it blank. On the other hand, if you think there's a sensible default value, you can put the default value here. Okay. So what do you think most people would say to Vader? I will start with sorry, sir. Even though there's no particular reason, you say sorry. So we can just kind of put it here and test it. Okay, this is just a test. Text alignment. Okay, most of you probably want to align to the left because in English we write from left to right, so we want the text to align to the left hand side. For the most part, you can make it center or make it right. It is up to you. Visible, yes, we definitely want it to be visible, because if it's not visible, we cannot do anything with it, even though it is enabled. Now, what is the difference between visibility versus whether it is enabled?
Visible means it's there, but you can't see it. Enabled means it's not actually active on the screen, so it won't affect anything else.
Exactly. So enable means if it is not enabled, that means and visible, that means it's still there. It takes up space on your screen, but it's grayed out. So there's nothing you cannot interact with it. On the other hand, if it's enabled and it is invisible, then you cannot even see it. There's no way to interact with something that is invisible. All right. So we have width is automatic. You can make it as wide as the parent, which in this case means it's as wide as the screen itself. So you can set it if you want to. Height, I just make it automatic. All right. So now is a good time to start up my virtual machine. Use the emulator to test the software. So we say AI starter lowercase. Wait until it says it's opening a port, and it's now waiting for the message. So now we can go back here and go to connect to emulator. And it's going to take a little bit of time. So the first thing we want to do is to make sure that it looks right, and all the properties are doing the way are affecting the features of the component the way it's supposed to. You can actually make some pretty interesting application, even though App Inventor has its limitations. But for anything other than interactive games or first-person games or anything that requires a lot of graphical stuff, App Inventor is not bad. I mean, it's actually a pretty decent programming environment.
I was pretty amazed at how easily it integrated with the App Inventor Android app, where you just scan the QR code and it works. It just works.
Looks on tab, but the screen resolution sucks.
Really?
It's actually worse than compiling it and manually installing it. It's horrible.
All right, so we have the application running. You can see that there's a default text content of sorry, and then you click the Darth Vader icon to send a message to Vader. Now, obviously, at this point, it's not going to do a single thing because there's no code associated with the button. It doesn't. Well, I think it pops up the next screen, but it doesn't pass anything to the next screen. All right. So at least we got the text box here. We verified the text box is working the way it's supposed to. So now we can go back to here and say, okay, but I don't want to just display a message. I want to send that message to the next screen. Okay. So in order to do this, we'll go ahead and change the blocks of this particular screen first. So we switch to the blocks here, and then we say, let's go ahead and not just open up another screen. We want to open another screen, and we pass a value to the other screen. So we'll use this alternative way to open another screen, which is kind of like the first one. You still have to supply the name of the other screen. And whatever we don't need, you can leave it here if you think you might need it later, or you can just toss it and throw it into the trash can. If I turn on the speaker, it actually has sound effect, for throwing something into the garbage can. So now we have to specify the start value. So in this case, the start value is actually pretty simple. It really is just the text content of the text box. So we'll go ahead and go to the text content, which is this block here, is textbox message.text, and click it here. So now it's going to take whatever content is in the text box at the time when you click on that button. And remember, the button is the bitmap. Okay, so when you click on the bitmap, it's going to send this to the other screen. But here comes the question: how do I know the other screen is actually getting this content? Well, the way it's designed right now, we don't. Okay, because when we switch to screen 2 or the second screen, it doesn't do a single thing. All it does is when you click button 1, it closes the screen, which is not very helpful to debug this particular program to see whether it works or not. So the simplest thing we can do is to either use a text box, or we can change the title of the screen to something, but we'll make it a little bit fancy. So we'll switch back to designer view of the second screen, and we'll go ahead and add a text, add a label to the application, to the screen, just so that we can see what is being passed to it. I don't want to make this too complicated at this point. We can always make it more complicated later after verifying this part is working. Now you can see that I'm only adding a little bit of feature to the application, and then I run it again to test it, to make sure it is working before I stack up more stuff on top of what I have done so far. And you might say, well, that's because you're teaching a class. We have to go slow and demonstrate all the steps. But when you are writing your application, I strongly recommend that you do the same thing. Just do a few things, test it again, okay? Because that's one of the things that you guys can do today that people were not able to do in the 50s or the 60s. Okay? What do you do as a programmer in the 50s or the 60s? What do you do to write a program? Do you drag and drop blocks, using a GUI?
Punch cards.
Punch cards, exactly. So you have to spend a lot of time to create or to prepare the punch cards. And after you prepare the punch cards, what do? Do you think they let you sit in front of a mainframe computer and run your stack of cards through the system? No. You submit your card to a person at a counter, and then that person will schedule your job at a particular time of a particular day, and then the result of your batch job will be returned back to you, after that. So if your program doesn't work, then your turnaround time is like a day. Instead of interactive, okay? I'm going to make a change, test the program, go back and make more changes. So make use of this feature. Now with the label, we also have all kinds of properties. You can change the name here too. I'm not even going to do that. You can change the text of the label to nothing, or you can just use a placeholder like ... just so that it displays something on the screen, but not necessarily something that's useful. But that's good enough for me, at least at this point, because I just want to see whether the second screen can get that text message from the first screen. That's all I want to do. So now we'll go back to blocks, and when a screen starts, we have to find a way to detect, oh, okay, this screen is being started this way, and here's the message. The get plain start text is going to grab that value. Okay, even though it's useful, it's not as useful as it's not going to be that useful right now, because it doesn't get triggered. Okay, this is just a property. It's just basically saying, oh, by the way, whichever screen started, you pass along this particular text value. But in order to make use of that text value and to change my label, this by itself or get start value is not going to help me. Okay, I need something to trigger the initialization of the label itself. So what I need to do is to go to the screen itself, which is the second screen, and go back here and use when second screen dot initialize for this purpose. This is an event handler. Okay, initialize is a very special event because it maps to the event of when the screen is first created. Okay, it's first triggered by another screen. So you want to make use of this to initialize things that you need to do, at the beginning of this screen starting point. So now I can say, oh, okay, when this screen is first created, let's go ahead and change the label to whatever text value is passed to me. So now I go to label 1, and I can now set the value or the text of label 1 to whatever the start value is when I'm created, when the first screen creates the second screen. So I go back to control, and then I grab. Either one would be fine. In this case, I can either grab just start value, or I can grab get plain start text, because it is a text value to begin with. So I can just grab either one, and it should work. All right. So now my application is I've made enough changes to so I can test it again. So I switch back to screen 1 because the emulator is complaining about something. Error from companion, runtime error. Set encoder's property has too few arguments. 3 must be 4. Again. Okay, the text in the input box, which can be set by a programmer in the designer or blocks editor, can be entered. Okay, that's referring to just that text. Okay, opens a new screen in a multiple screen app and passes the start value to that screen. That should do what I think it should do.
Refresh, because I have the same stuff up and it's not, and it's just fine.
Yep, that's it. Weird.
Something probably on there and crashed.
You might have something to do with the fact that it's running and you changed it while it's running.
Possibly, but it sounds more like a compile time error. Like it's complaining about the Java. It's coming from Java itself. So the program that is creating is not meeting the expectation. It's just okay. All right, so let's go ahead and test this app. It should be updated already. Click the screen. Oh, it's not starting the next screen. Did I forget something here? Oh, I think that has to do with the fact that I'm running it inside AI. Oh no, last time it did it too. So that's something is not doing it right. Let me go ahead and reset the connection and start it again. And I click this button, and now it switches to the second screen, and
Slowly.
yeah, very slowly, but it did work. So it did pass the message to the second screen. Great. Okay, so it's working, just fine. So now my new challenge is, how do I go from the second screen back to the first one? Okay, but pass something along, and so that the second screen can pass something back to the first screen, and the first screen will display it, somewhere on the screen. Okay, so let's go ahead and see what we can do here. So I go back to blocks, and this is the second screen. We already have the block to close the screen, which is great, but I don't want to just close the screen anymore. I want to close the screen with a value because I want to pass that information back to the first screen. So now I'm going to use close screen with plain text. or with value. Either way, it's going to be okay. So I'm going to go back here, and then we can specify the value. Now, the difference is, this one allows you to specify any type of value to pass back to the previous one, whereas the other block only allows you to use text. This one allows you to do more than just the regular text, but it will work with just regular text as well. Okay, so let's pass back something that is kind of unique to what is being passed to me. So we'll go ahead and construct the return message using concatenation or the join operation. Okay. So we'll go ahead and say, I don't know, what do you think Vader should reply with in this case? Failed. Oh, I know what to do. Okay, so I'm gonna get the start value, which is what is being passed to this particular screen, and then I'll attach a second piece of text here, which is just literal. So I'm gonna just attach a little fun piece here. I will just say is not acceptable. All right, so that's what it's going to do. It will pass whatever string that is passed to the second screen with the appending of is not acceptable back to the first screen. Okay, so we kind of know what is supposed to pass back to the first screen when the button is clicked. And now we switch back to the first screen and say, okay, when the second screen closes, what do I do to, one, know that the second screen has now closed, and to do something about it, so that at least I have some way to tell that the second screen is coming back with a particular value, okay, with what we call a return value. Okay, so what do you think? The screen looks like this, okay, at this point. There are several things you can do. You can put a label here. You can also use a notifier. Okay, so I'm going to use a notifier in this case, because I can use a label, but we already played with labels already. So let's go ahead and use a notifier instead. So notifier is an invisible component, so it doesn't get into the screen itself, but it does show up as an invisible, non-visible component. And then we'll go to the text, we'll go to the blocks part of this particular program, and this time I need something that will trigger when a screen has closed. Well, I think we have seen something like that before. Okay, so we go to screen 1 because it is an event for screen 1 itself. And when you look at this, we have two blocks connected to what we want to do, and one is there's only one. When some screen, other screen closed, then it will start this block. This is the first time we use an event handler that has a parameter. Other screen name is a parameter because it doesn't matter which other screen has closed, okay? Because we might have like 60 other screens that we can start from this particular screen. They all come, when they come back, they all go to this particular event handler. So you need to specify the logic to handle the coming back from a different screen using the screen name inside this particular event handler. Okay? Now, since we only have one screen, we don't have to deal with it, okay? Because when it comes back, it has to be coming back from that particular screen. So I'm not going to make use of other screen name. On the other hand, I am going to make use of result because I want to show something on the screen based on the result of what the other screen is passing back to me. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll go to notifier and use something that we have done already. And that one thing is just show alert, which means it's going to pop up a gray, kind of dark gray box on the screen. It will fade in with a message and then it will fade out. There's no button to click or anything like that. And the notice is really just the result itself. Okay, but I can make it just a little bit more fun using text and using the join operator again. And this time I will put literal text here and says Vader says something. Okay, and then the rest is just whatever the other screen passes back to me, which I can access in control. So control, oh no, I take it back, sorry. It's not in control, it's right here, okay? It's just result. So when you hover over result, not clicking anything, if you just hover your mouse pointer over it, it'll give you these choices already. I'm not changing it to anything, I just want to get its current value. So I'm going to click here, and then I have my program. It's already done. So now this program will pass information to the other screen, and then the other screen will pass information back to the screen here. So I have a two-way communication between the screens. Okay. Let's go ahead and try it out. The emulator should be running the latest version of this software already. It is not visible, so I'm going to say, we'll keep this message here, click the button, and the second screen starts up, and it says sorry. If I click this button here, it will close the second screen, go back to the first one, but pass a result back to the first screen. So I click this button here. Now we're back to the first screen, and then the notifier should display something on screen that says, Vader says sorry is not acceptable, which is exactly what we wanted to do. So here's a very simple application that demonstrates how to use more than one screens. You can start up another screen. When the other screen is done, it can pass information back to the screen that started it in the first place. Are there any questions about this particular demonstration? Whether I'm a big fan of Star Wars is not one of the questions that you need to ask. You can ask it. I'm not saying that you cannot.
Star Wars or Star Trek?
Star Wars.
No, I know. I'm saying which one, Star Wars or Star Trek for you personally?
Well, that depends on the episode. See, Star Wars is episode 4, 5, and 6. I don't really care much about 1, 2, or 3.
How about the...
Especially 1.
Star Trek, it's TNG.
The idea of 7. Star Wars 7.
I don't really have a whole lot of hope. I think the subtitle can be lost of all hope. For two reasons. Okay, the first reason is Spielberg, got complete control over the project again, which he did not with episode 4, 5, and 6. And for the most part, he signed his name, and the other people actually did most of the work. 1, 2, and 3 is what happens when Spielberg got his control back.
George Lucas.
Oh, not Spielberg. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, George Lucas, got his control back in episodes 1, 2, and 3, and not only is George Lucas in control now, Disney is also in control, and that's the thing that kind of I don't know. Huh?
I'm sorry, Professor Eccles, was that your name?
Disney.
Disney.
Disney bought Lucasfilm.
Yes, of course. Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep. I mean, some people, including some faculty member of this department, really likes Disney. I'm just not one of those people. Well, guess what? Disney now has a new princess. Princess Leia. Think about the princess, think about the Disney princess lineup. Now there's Princess Leia with a blaster. Yeah. Yep.
All the rest of them are having T-Letter. She's also Vader.
The big bad wolf, no problem. I can deal with it. The bad witch, I can deal with it. Okay. Too much digression. But this is a simple app. Are there any questions about this? Yep.
So if you want to get the whatever's in the input on the same screen stored to a value, how would you do that? So like if you want sorry to be stored or whatever the user inputted into a variable on that same screen, how would you do it?
Just put it into a variable?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a little bit tricky because if you want to put this text here into a variable, you cannot trigger anything to execute until the focus is until you have a transition of the focus getting into the text box or out of the text box. When someone is typing in the text box, your software has no control at that point. So do you have any particular trigger, for grabbing the text?
I figure out how to do it. I used to not in their help documentation about it.
using a button is one way. Do you want to just put it inside a variable?
Yeah, so I can
store the value.
Yeah, use it to manipulate later as part of other.
But do you have any user action that can somehow
I have
hit?
an enter button on my screen on one of them.
Oh, okay. Well, that is easy because let's say we are dealing with this one here. Okay, so we're dealing with button. I can just add some code to demonstrate, how to do that. We'll go to variables, and I don't think I have any initialized at this point. So I'm going to create a variable for this particular screen. This is also a good place to remind you guys that variables are they're locked to a particular screen. Okay, they're scoped to be inside a particular screen. So if I say, here, and I say initialize global variable to something, and I'll just say message to Vader, and I can make it initialize to nothing. Okay, so I can go to text here and just give it an empty string, basically to say, okay, initially that's nothing. Then when the button is clicked, what I can do is I can go to variables and then just use a set here and set global message to Vader to the content of the text box. So now I go to text box message and grab the text value of the text box at this point and use that to initialize the global variable message to Vader. Is that kind of what you were planning to do? Okay. So that's how you can do it.
Okay.
The tricky part is you need a trigger. You need an event so that you can start your own code to store that data into your variable. But as someone is typing, using the text box, you cannot get the content at that point. That's a limitation of App Inventor 2 because in the Java version you have control also when someone is typing. But in App Inventor 2 they don't give you the ability to process as someone is typing in the text box. If you use a timer, you might be able to do it, but I have no idea. I have not tested it whether when you're still typing it, whether you will get everything that is in the text box at that point, or whether it is buffered and you're going to get back the same value all over again until the focus is out of the text box. So that's something you can kind of test if you want to do a background thing and use a timer to do some background processing. All right, so we have an application that's running now. Okay, it passes information from one screen to the next, and then when you close the other screen, it passes information back to the first screen. But what if what you want to do is more than just one text view? What if you have like 3 numbers, 2 text boxes, and a few other things to pass along? Then it's not simple, right? Because it only gives you the ability to pass one thing. Because if you look at this particular thing here, open another screen with start value, it gives you only one slot, okay, one place to say one single start value. So if you have multiple things that you want to pass along, this doesn't seem to have the ability to do it. So what we will do next is to kind of change our focus a little bit and talk about what is a list, okay? Because a list is your way to get around this, seemingly, limitation, okay? All right, the row sheet is here, so make sure you sign it, when you're at the end of the class. All right, so let's go ahead and see, what is a list and what we can do with a list. I'm going to start another project, just to demonstrate, what to do with lists. So I'm going to start with a new project here, and I'll say, test list, and open it up. Right. So we'll start with something simple, and then we'll move on and get something more complicated. I'll use one single button to trigger something, and I'll also probably need a text box to do something. Either that, or I can use a notifier. I'm going to use a label for one thing, and we'll have maybe 2 text boxes. So we'll throw in 2 text boxes here. Okay. So in this case, each text box is going to contain one piece of information, and I want to see if I can save both pieces of information into a list, and then from the list it'll go back to the individual items. Okay, a list is basically a way for you to combine different pieces of data into one single one. Okay, it's a way to contain something. Look at a list as a folder. Okay, if you look at text or a numerical value as a file, which means you cannot contain something else inside it, a list is more like a folder where you can have a list containing a whole bunch of text stuff, a bunch of number stuff, or even a bunch of lists. It's just like you can create a folder inside a folder, and the list can do that as well. Okay. So the first thing we'll do with this particular sample program is when it starts, I'm going to initialize a global variable, which is a list. And that particular list may have, let's say, 2 items. So go to screen 1, and then go to Initialize. And go to Variables. We want to initialize a global name to something. So we'll change this name here and say app data. Okay, I have one single variable to store everything that I need to save for this particular app. At this point, you can initialize it to anything. You can even initialize to just an empty text box here, or 0, okay? Because we're going to change it. We will change it when screen 1 is initialized. Okay. You can also do an empty list here too. That works as well. But we'll go ahead and go here and initialize here, and then we'll go to lists. If you click on the lists tab, it gives you all of the things that you can do with a list. And what we'll do is we'll click here to make a list, and we'll go back to variables and set our global variable to an empty list. That might be an empty list tab already. Yep, there's one. But whether we want to have an empty list or not is a different thing. Okay, so I don't want to use an empty list. I want to make a list of 2 items, and those 2 items are based on the current values of the 2 text boxes. Are we doing okay so far? Okay. So we go to text box 1, grab its value, and stash it here. And then we'll do the same thing with text box 2, grab its value, and stash it here. So what I've done here with the blue box here is I'm combining the values of 2 text boxes into one single list. But a list is one single thing. So now I have a way to pass that one single thing to another screen. Am I still doing okay so far in terms of the concept of a list? It's a folder. Okay, I'm creating a folder. It has 2 items inside. Okay. And now I can have my button here, and say when the button is clicked, I'm going to start the next screen. All right. So I need another screen. We'll just call it screen 2. It doesn't have to be any specific name. So I'm going to start the next screen using. Oops. Okay.
Screen what screen? Not screen 2.
Oh, okay. I mean screen 2. That's fine. Okay. Click on the wrong one. Okay. So in screen 1, I still have something else to do. I go to Control, and then I say open another screen with start value. So I click this here, and the screen name of the second screen I think is just screen 2. Let me double check. And go to designer, because yep, the name is just screen 2. So I go back to screen 1, go back to blocks, and specify the name of the screen that I'm starting. It is uppercase screen 2. It is case sensitive. If you have uppercase and you use a lowercase, it's not going to work. Okay, you have to match the cases here. And what I'm going to do is I'm not going to pass 2 things. I'm going to pass one thing, which is my global variable app data. So I go to variables and use get to specify my variable global app data. Okay. So this is one way to pass 2 pieces of individual thing to another screen. Now, but I don't know whether it's working or not until I reprogram screen 2 so that it will display both items. So now I go to screen 2, still in blocks view, and use it to display the content of the two text boxes from screen 1. First thing, go to designer here, put 2 labels up here, and then use 1 to reflect the content of each text box. My emulator just crashed. It's okay, we'll start it later. So in the blocks here, I'm going to go to screen 2 and use Initialize as an event handler, and basically say when I'm created, I have all these things to do. Okay, I want to take the start value to this screen, break it apart, grab the 2 individual things, put it back into label 1 and label 2, so that when this screen starts, I will see the content of text box 1 and text box 2 on this screen. Alright, so let's see how we can do this part here. I can do it the easy way, or I can do it the slightly harder way. So I'm going to do the slightly harder way, just to show you something that you can also do when you're working on your program. So I will go to procedure, no, maybe not procedure, go to variables here. If you go to variables, instead of using a global variable, which means it's visible throughout the entire screen, the blocks of this particular screen, I can use a local variable, or I can use local variables in this case. So I'm going to use local variables. There are 2 blocks associated with local variables. One that looks like this, and the other one looks like this. Which one do you think will fit into this part here?
Top one.
Top one, exactly, because this one requires a little tab, and there's no matching notch here. So this one is not going to work. We'll throw it away, and we'll put it here. Now, if you click on this box here, it gives you the option to create multiple local variables at the same time. So I'm going to create 2 local variables here, and then you can change the names of your local variables. So we'll just go ahead and call the first one, let's say value 1, and we'll call the second one value 2. All right, and you can also attach the initial values of value 1 and also value 2. Okay, we can leave it blank here. It is a warning, but it's not a problem. Okay, so we'll do some initialization here instead of doing it outside here. We'll have some more blocks here. So we go back to variables, and then we basically use set here, and you can see that set has visibility to all the global variables as well as local variables within this scope, within this block here. And that's really handy because you don't have to remember, oh, what is the name of a particular variable. It gives you a list to choose from. So now we're going to choose, say, value 1. And we have to break the list down and say, I'm not interested in the entire list. I'm not interested in the entire folder. I just need to access the first item of the list. Okay. Well, since it is list related, we go to the lists tab here. And the one thing that we need is to use select list item. Now, when you select a list item, you first have to tell it which list are we talking about. Well, it's the start value. The start value is the list. So now we go to control, and then we grab the start value. Now this time you have to be careful not to use the plain text, the plain start text, because that's really it's just the text equivalence of the start value. We need to make use of the actual start value in this case. And the index tells you, which one do you want to access. For those of you who already know how to write programs in C and C++ and many other languages, the index usually starts with 0. But in App Inventor 2, it starts with 1. The first item is item 1 instead of item 0. So we go to math, we grab a constant of 0, put it here. I'm not going to go any further than this, just to make sure that I can access the first item, because the second item is going to be about the same thing. So after I set this value, I'm going to go back to label 1 and set its text to the value of my local variable 1. So I'm going to say get value 1, just put it here. That's my entire application. Let's see whether it works or not. So we switch back to screen 1 and restart the emulator. I do not know why it crashed, but it did. How many people are comfortable with the concept of a list? It's basically the same thing as an array, kind of, okay? Except it's more elastic, it's more flexible, because you can keep appending stuff to a list and it gets longer and longer. Whereas you cannot really do that to an array. In most programming languages, you cannot. It also makes it easy to have a list inside a list inside a list.
The only thing I hate about it is the fact that they're starting at 1 and not 0. They're used to a program.
I think they intentionally made that choice, because most people count from 1 instead of 0. And people who already understand to count from 0 can readjust to count from 1, with App Inventor 2, but not the other way around. All right, so we have the app running here. We'll just go ahead and type ABC in the first box, XYZ in the second box, and then click the button to start the second screen. It's not starting the second screen. Screen 2 as the name, and that should be the right name. Let me really just double check in the designer. Screen 2 is the name of that screen. This is just the title. I can change the title to whatever I want. Yeah, well, that's because, but it didn't get the value because it's not started because of the screen 1 starting it. Okay, so I'm back to screen 1, and the emulator should follow. Back to screen 1, and I will type ABC, DEF this time. Click the button. It's not starting the second screen.
No, it doesn't work on the app. I compiled and ran it. It's not working there either. It's not passing variables.
Okay, well, in a situation like this, next thing I'm going to do is to simplify screen 2 and not to do.
There it is.
Oh, you got
You said it needed to be 1.
Okay, attempt to get item 0 of the list, empty string. The minimum valid item number is
I
1.
think you actually left that constant set to 0.
Oh,
I think
okay.
that's what happened.
Thank you.
Now I see it.
I kept saying it starts with 1 and then I started with 0. Okay. Okay, so let's give it a try now. It's still not starting the second screen.
Done. On the keyboard, it's done. Now try it.
Nope.
It's like you just lost my G.
I think the AI companion is kind of interfering in this case. Okay, well, in case like this, I'm going to debug the whole thing. I go back to screen 2, and I just say, forget this, not going to do it. Okay, I just want screen 2 to start, that's all. Okay. Simplified, right? In case this block of code has any problem, now I have eliminated that possibility. So I go back to screen 1, the emulator should follow, and I click the button, it should start the second screen. And it's still not doing it. So the problem is not that, it could be making a list here. So we'll get rid of that too. Oh, it just started the second screen.
Interesting. Appeared to be that.
Yeah, AI companion, definitely is interfering a little bit here, if not a whole lot. Okay, we have program. Like it still doesn't want to do it. Still doesn't want to do it. Because I'm just passing an empty string here. The error is where? Show warnings. Okay, that's fine. It's just complaining this block is floating in the middle of nowhere. But that usually does not interfere with anything. Alright, in cases like that, we'll go ahead and reset the connection and start it over again. If that still doesn't work, that means I have to create an APK file and then upload the APK file and run from the APK file itself. I'll show you guys how to do it. Okay, so let's go ahead and reconnect the emulator.
Nope. I'm testing it live. It doesn't work. Text, it switches, but it's not receiving the information on the screen too.
Okay. Well, this one won't even start the next screen. That's the first problem that I have to deal with. The start value may arrive as text, anyway. So that means that we need a way to encode a list into regular text and then decode it back into a list. Okay, so application starting. This time it did switch, but since I took this code out entirely, it doesn't do a single thing. So now we can reattach this code, and you should fill all the sockets with blocks. Fine. We'll give them something.
Empty blocks.
Yep. Now it's happy. All right. So we'll go back to the first screen. I clicked one time too many.
Restarts.
Yep. Doesn't like it. Okay, so here's the other way to upload something to test your program. What you need to do is to use build, and you can either use a QR code or you can save the APK file. The QR code works well if you are using an actual device, so you can actually use a camera to take a snapshot of the QR code, and that turns out to be a URL to the APK file that is stored on the server for 15 minutes. They say there's a limitation of time you can download your application. If you're dealing with an emulator, that does not work. Okay, the QR code is not going to work with an emulator. So with an emulator, it's a little bit more involved, unfortunately. You have to use this feature here to save the APK file onto your PC first. So we'll go ahead and save it first. And when everything is done, it will save it. Did I?
You did the wrong one.
I clicked the
QR
one.
code.
Okay. Save APK to my computer. Okay, sorry about that.
Your hand is not listening to your mouth.
There's a disconnect somewhere.
Runtime error. Runtime error.
Runtime error. Okay, so now I have a local file. So the question now is, what are you going to do with this local file? You need to use ADB in order to do this. So it is a little bit more involved. You have to find out where the executable is installed with AI setup. In Linux, it's a little bit different compared to Windows. So in Linux, ADB is already kind of installed with this computer. So in this case, I can just say, ADB, I think list or ADB, devices.
In your portable version, is it just
In the portable version, it is really just where the folder is. If you go down, I think it's not exactly there. You have to kind of go down a few levels to get to it. It's one of the support commands that is installed with it.
Commands for app.
Right. You have to go to that folder to get ADB.
Yeah.
So once you have located ADB, the first thing I want to do is to see if the device is there. Nope, the emulator is off. So I'm gonna have to reconnect the emulator. If you have an actual device, it's easier because you can just point your camera to the QR code and just download the QR code. You do have to enable run application or install app from an unknown source, because otherwise it wouldn't let you do it. But using the emulator, this is the only way to really debug a multi-screen application. It's not too bad. It's just a few more steps, and you have to type some command line stuff to do it. Okay, as long as the application is here, I can still go to this part here and type DB devices, and it's still not detecting it. Maybe it's the wrong one. No, it's not Chrome. HDADB. It's not seeing the emulator.
Is debugging enabled automatically on the emulator? USB debugging or whatever it is?
It should be. Okay, this one is not in screen 2. In screen 2 initializes, we are not getting the content to replace the label text here. So this part is not working correctly, and I think I have a pretty good idea of why it's not doing it. This is not working. This code here to get a item from using start value as a list is not working. Okay, so how do we know the start value is or is not a list? That's the first question, right? Because if start value is considered text, then I can never see it as a list. So before this step here, I'm going to take this out, and instead I will do something like this. I will basically say if the start value is a list, I'm going to display one message. If not, I'll display another message. So this is an introduction to a conditional statement. If you go to the control block here, there is a if-then block here. Now with the if-then block, you can click on this symbol here, and it gives you the ability to specify an else as well. This is a way for your program to make a decision so that based on a condition, it can sometimes execute one branch, and based on the condition, it can also execute another branch. The condition is going to be this slot here. Okay, it has to be something that is either true or false. If it is true, then the then block executes. If it is false, then the else block executes. Okay. Are you guys kind of familiar with the concept of a conditional statement? Something that allows you to make a decision, and depending on the condition, it can go one way or the other. Okay. So now we can go to lists, and interestingly, it has a way to see it, to ask that question, to answer that question. It has something that looks like this. Is something a list? So what we'll do is we'll say, is the start value a list? If it is, we'll do one thing. If it's not, we'll do something else. If it is, we go to label 1, and then we set the text of label 1 to just something very simple, and say start value is a list. If not, we'll go to the other branch and specify and say start value is not a list. And I have a sinking feeling that it is not a list. It's not the end of the world, but it does involve a little bit more stuff, more code to make this program work. So we switch back to screen 1, We have to reset it again. And start. I wrote another program just to do a list to text conversion and then back. So I know I have a solution to this. Well, here's a question since we're waiting for the emulator to start up. What if there's a piece of code from one application that you want to reuse in another application? And let's say it's a pretty big chunk.
Method.
Screenshots.
Okay, a method?
Yeah.
But how do you make that code available to the second application?
Just look up the source code and copy and paste it.
You can look at the source code, and that's basically what you need to do. Okay, you have to download the AIA file. The AIA file is nothing more than a zip file, and then inside it has XML documents. Inside one of the XML documents is the quote-unquote source code of your entire program. So you have to locate the right block because it's all done by the name. You can follow the name, and you can locate that block. And at that point, you can use a text editor to manually copy a chunk of code from one XML file to another XML file, repackage it back into the AIA file, and re-upload it back to AI2, App Inventor 2. That's how you can copy and paste code. It's not the easiest thing you can do, but it does work. Okay, I have done it several times, and it does work. Okay, so it says right here, start value is not a list. In other words, it is only considered a text, but not a list. Okay, so if it is not a list and text, what does it look like? That's the second question, right? So we'll go ahead and use a label 2 for that purpose. We'll set label 2 text to start value because it is not a list. It has to be just regular text. So we'll go ahead and say, but what does it look like? It looks close enough, but not exactly what we need, unfortunately. So we go ahead and look at this and switch back to this here. So we have to use back to switch back to the first screen. And it doesn't want to work. AI Companion is definitely interfering with what we want to do here. This is A, B, C, D, E, F. Switch to the second screen. It is not. Oh, I attached it to the wrong place. All right, there we go. And we have to switch back to the first one, and that doesn't work. We have to switch manually to screen 1. It says it's blank. So that means I have no way to send a list to the other one. Well, not in the regular sense. We're running out of time today. I have a solution, but I don't have enough time to give you the solution. So on Wednesday, what we'll do, sorry? To be continued. It's a cliffhanger. So what we'll do on Wednesday is I'm going to show you some code, and it's going to be a big mess. I don't want you guys to get kind of surprised by what you're going to see on the other day. But it is one way to convert anything, okay, into a list that is represented by text. So we can transmit it not only from one screen to another screen. You can actually send it over the network. You can use it to send to another application, sitting somewhere else on the network because it's just regular text. And then on the other side, I have another subroutine, another code to convert it back into a list, into something that is structured. So that's what we'll do on Wednesday. I know it's a little bit out of the scope of this class, but in order to do something like this, that is required, unfortunately. Okay. So your homework is still just to do the use case diagram, which is a lot easier than what we are talking about here today. But it is a good starting point. You have to start with that. I'll see you guys on Wednesday then. If you have not signed in with the sign-in sheet, come here and then initial your name. Sorry?
The computers, they tell you don't forget your